Before any of you go into the comment section and say, hey Paul, this comparison doesn't make any sense, hear me out, because a lot of people are still under the impression that IEMs and getting into the audiophile world is super expensive. But the good news is both of these setups can set you back only by about 6,000 rupees, whether you go for the wireless or the wired setup. These are the JBL 230NC, and these very quickly became a favorite of mine because I was using the Nothing earbuds for a prolonged period of time, and I didn't really think that there could be anything that really superseded that when it came to the sound, but this had certain aspects which I did prefer over those. And the JBL is going to be up against these. These are the Tangzu Wan'ers. I recently reviewed these, and these have soon become quite popular in the IEM world. Not only for its affordability, but also because of the way it sounds. So how is this comparison going to be fair at all? Because one set is wired and the other is completely wireless. Well, the JBL supports SBC and AAC codecs, whereas the Wan'er is of course wired. And if you've used IEMs before, you know that you could enjoy a world of high-res music with a wired set of IEMs. So what I had to do is I've plugged these into the Astel & Kern XB10. Now, this does support SBC, AAC, aptX and aptX HD codec. So yet again, this might just have an advantage over the JBL 230NC. But what I'm doing is I'm broadcasting to both devices, the JBL and the Astel & Kern at the same time. So my phone shifts over to broadcasting only SBC codecs. So this should be as fair as possible when it comes to how they sound. But before I get into how they sound, let's look at the other advantages and disadvantages when it comes to their build. The JBL does come with a neat carrying case, which is super convenient, whereas the Tangzu comes along with a cable, and in this situation you'll have to plug it into the Astel & Kern XB10 if you want wireless audio, or if you don't want to be tethered to your phone if it still has a 3.5mm jack. The JBL has a neat matte finish which has fared pretty well for me over the last 9 months, and it's built pretty solid, so should be able to deal with some drops. It has an IPX4 rating, so should be okay for workouts and in light drizzles outdoors. The biggest advantage here is that it's wireless and perfect for being your companion for public transport, since it doesn't have a cable to get snagged anywhere. The Tangzu's disadvantage in this situation is its cable being around if you plan on using it for commutes, but its overall build does make it seem quite premium. With a neat gold design sitting under what looks like a resin enclosure, it's bound to get some people talking and asking you about them. It's got a good quality cable with a gold plated 3.5mm jack to plug into the XB10, or if your phone has a 3.5mm jack, a high-res player or a portable or desktop amp, it can also be plugged into these. The Astel & Kern XB10 is a neat little puck made of quality plastics, and it comes with a little clip that will let you mount it onto your belt, lapel or pocket. It's small enough not to make you feel it's a burden to carry around in this setup with the Tangzu. On a feature front, the JBL is the bee's knees because it's got almost every feature you'd most probably want. It's got active noise cancelling despite having good passive isolation. It's got great battery life. You'll get about 6 to 8 hours with the ANC on, and you can extend your listening time to up to 30 hours with the case. You get touch controls to control your music. It syncs up with the JBL app, which also has some inbuilt EQ presets, and you can also tweak them a bit with a manual option. The Tangzu doesn't have any features thanks to it being a purely analog set of earphones, but what does have a few features is the Astel & Kern XB10. You can play and pause your music much like with the JBLs, but this has tactile buttons. You can skip to the next and previous tracks and adjust volume too. Then it has a 3.5mm auxiliary output and a 2.5mm balanced output as well if you have a set of IEMs that has that jack. Should you ever be on the move, the JBL 230NC might be a little more convenient, because if you want to take any of your phone calls, the JBL does offer environmental noise cancelling through an algorithm it has, whereas the Tangzu, well, it's totally analog. But the XB10 does have an inbuilt microphone, so you can take calls, but don't expect it to be as good as the JBL because I don't think it's running an ENC algorithm. But if you'd like to know how you'd sound to your recipient, let's put their microphones to the test. So I'm calling from the usual busy street that I normally call and do these call tests from, and I am not expecting the XB10 to do very much here except bring my voice over to you as well as all the noise, in fact, because like I mentioned, it does not have environmental noise cancelling. So I have been on the camera microphone all this time just to give you a sense of the noise around me, because there's a lot of traffic moving here, there is some construction work going on around over here. So I will switch over to the XB10 microphone right about now. So my voice being carried over to you can vary depending on how you use it, because if you've got this mounted in your car near the AC vent, it will be a little further away from you. Right now it is much closer to me, so if I were to from my shirt,
and hold it a bit closer to my mouth, I think my voice should carry over a little clearer. Whereas if it is a little further away from me, it will change. It's bound to vary depending on how close or far it is from your mouth. So this has been the XB10, and I'll switch over to the JBL 230NC right about now. So this one's environmental noise cancelling I've seen to be fairly good. In fact, I mean it's not the best out there. I think the Nothing Ear ones I found to be really impressive, but this is almost as good as those. For the price range, it does do this well, and of course you can see the difference in technology between these two when it comes to the mic quality, because obviously this is designed for convenience. It's designed for you to be on move. So it's not something that Astle and Kern would have factored in when they were working on the XP10 in particular. And likewise, if you were using a set of IEMs that had a microphone attached, which the Tangzu does come with, in fact, these are completely analog earphones, so there's no chance of it having environmental noise cancelling. So in a situation like this, it's very obvious which one of these earphones would make more sense. So I do hope that this is giving you a little more clarity about this topic that we're speaking about, and I'll see you back in the studio.
Here's where the scales start tipping over toward the Tangzu, because it handles itself like a seasoned set of earphones despite being a fairly new company. The JBL comes with a 6mm dynamic driver and is no slouch at all, because I remember comparing it with the Nothing Ear one, as I did mention, and there were certain details about the music and the way it handled its bass that made me really appreciate this over the Nothing Ear one at the time of comparing them. So it can really hold its own, and if you would like to know more about these earphones in particular, please feel free to watch my in-depth review on them. The Tangzu comes with a 10mm dynamic driver, and despite it being tuned towards being more audiophile, in my in-depth review, I didn't really think that it was the healthiest in the bass department. On a volume front, the JBL hits its sweet spot at about 50% volume, whereas the Tangzu is at about 30 to 35%. The reason for the Tangzu being at a lower volume than the JBL is because it's easy to drive with a low resistance of just 20 ohms. The XB10 has no issue driving these. The JBL performs very similarly up against other TWS earphones when it comes to its soundstage, but when it comes to the Tangzu Wan'ers, it seems to sound very small and narrow. The Tangzu, however, gives you a sense of openness, and the stage is much wider and there is more vertical stage compared to the JBL for sure. It's a completely different listening experience, especially if your priority is not convenience. When it comes to the imaging, the JBL again performs very similarly to other TWS earphones in its price segment. But when you do A/B listening between the Tangzu and the JBL seems rather uninterested in performing with any detail. It comes off as being quite veiled in its detail, almost like it's shown up to work on a Monday after only having 2 hours of sleep. The Tangzu certainly has an advantage over here because every single detail is quite pristine compared to the JBL. High frequencies come at you as if being written with a blunt pencil with the JBL. It doesn't carry as much crispness as the Tangzu, and it lacks the energy here as well. It's not that the JBL falls short with its delivery here. It performs well enough to enjoy the music and details in it, but the Tangzu does have an edge over it for certain. There is a good amount of detail and energy that comes from the Tangzu in this range that the JBL just cannot touch. Listening to Eric Clapton's Lies featuring John Mayer, the shaker and anything percussive come alive when listening to this track on the Tangzu. These smaller nuances exist more so with these IEMs than they do when the JBL is playing back the same audio. You can hear these with the JBLs, but they are just somewhere around casually and not precise in their existence, almost like they're in limbo. Mid frequencies have a significant recess here compared to the Tangzu, but it also seems to have a significant veil as well. Vocals and instruments on the JBL that exist in this range seem to be presented at a lower volume than the other frequencies, whereas with the Tangzu, the marriage between instruments and vocals here is more seamless and more natural in its delivery than feeling disconnected. Listening to Fleetwood Mac's Gypsy, Stevie Nicks' voice and harmonies that exist in this track sound unimportant with the JBL. You can certainly decipher what's being sung, but it sounds almost like the kind of mid-range you'd need subtitles on for when you compare it to the Tangzu. The Tangzu enunciates this range terrifically well. When listening to harmonies, you're almost able to tell how many voices have contributed towards a glorious sound, clearly putting the Tangzu ahead of the JBL yet again when it comes to the sound front. Low frequencies is where the Tangzu is not going to please the bass head. Rather, it shows you quality rather than quantity. Despite having a tiny 6mm driver, the JBL has been tuned well with bass in mind for the bass enthusiast. It's got a kick to it that most people will prefer over thinner sounding TWS earphones for sure. It does have a heft and body in this range that you wouldn't expect a 6mm driver to have, but it's most likely this very bass that eats into the mids which makes them sound as lost as they are. The Tangzu, on the other hand, isn't trying to extend as much as the JBL with as much enthusiasm. It's a little more composed about handling this range and doesn't get as assertive as the JBL for sure. So I don't see people using these for EDM. Listening to major lasers lean on, the Tangzu feeds you all the frequencies low down that you'd expect, but with this genre of music, the JBL is more likely to get your blood pumping for a workout. Should you prefer genres like easy listening, acoustic, jazz or blues, the Tangzu is an absolute joy to listen to because the timbre of the instruments in this range really make you appreciate what these can do for the price. Listening to the same genres with the JBL, if you know what these instruments are supposed to sound like, you'll know straight away that the JBL isn't quite getting their tonal quality right. It seems as if they're trying a little too hard to do the right thing with these genres but isn't quite getting there. So if you haven't realized yet, both of these are directed at two completely different kind of people. One is for convenience for that individual and the other is directed at a person whose sound is absolute priority and doesn't mind having a cable getting pulled here and there. And for that matter, it can be directed at one person because I do know people who use TWS earphones when they're on the go and they like to listen to good enough clarity and they know there will be a compromise, but when they come home the IEMs come back on and replace the TWS earphones. So the main advantage you have with IEMs is the fact that you're not going to be bottlenecked at SBC and AAC codecs. You're kind of capping the bit rate that you can listen to because your SBC and AAC will do a maximum of about 250 to 320 kbps. So the minute you come home and plug into a high-res player, or if you've got a portable one or a DAC or an amp, you can feed in that much more data. Now, yes, on a wireless form, you can use LDAC in some cases where you are feeding in that much more data, which is, I think, it caps at about 990 kbps. But that's still not close to what you can do if you've got good high-res audio, because I think some of the high-res files that I have, some of them go up to about 5000 kbps. That's 5 Mbps. It's that much more data that you can feed in and enjoy. Now, of course, if you don't want to get into the whole wired game and you prefer wireless for its convenience, there are certain positives and disadvantages. Now, of course, you're not going to get the best audio quality for one, and two is these products do have a certain life compared to the IEMs. I think the IEMs are more long term because there aren't tiny little cells that can die out in a year or less, or maybe even 2 years. I've had some products that have lasted over 2 years when it comes to the wireless earphones. Some people do find them failing at about 9 months. It does depend how you've used them and looked after them. And of course, you do have the perks of being able to take calls on those with your recipient being able to hear you that much better. So it does have its plus points for sure. Now, this comparison isn't specifically about the JBL and the Tangzu. This is generally about wireless and wired because there is a plethora of wireless earphones out there as well as when it comes to wired. Now, I have heard a whole bunch of other IEMs like the 7Hz Salnote Zero I did quite like. In fact, where the Tangzu is lacking, I remember those being really good when it came to its bass. Another favorite of mine is the KZ ZSN Pro X. I did quite enjoy those. And what's crazy is that a lot of these are affordable today, because if you still think that audiophile gear is expensive, it's no longer the case, because when it comes to the set that I have compared to today, this is how much they cost, in fact. So if you would like to know how much these cost, at the time of recording this video at least, the JBL 230NC has a maximum retail price of 7,999 rupees. But as of today, it is being sold for 5,999. So let's put that cap at 6,000. The Tangzu Wan'ers are going for an MRP of about 2,299, but you can get them with their own microphone on Headphone Zone for 2,090 rupees. Now, if you want to get the wireless setup that I have, that I've been using at least for this comparison, the Astel & Kern XB10 has a maximum retail price of 14,999. Yeah, you heard that right. But it's being sold for, again, at the time of recording this, it's being sold for 2,999. So this is a little bit more affordable than the JBL 230NC, and you get sound that is way more detailed. It's got a wider stage, it's got some vertical stage. Overall, it's a lot more enjoyable, especially if you're listening to those genres that I mentioned, acoustic and jazz and so on. So there you have it. This was just a general comparison between a set of wired and wireless earphones. I think the theme continues when it comes to listening to certain IEMs, especially when you look at them in a similar price range. Now, if you already have a phone that has a headphone jack, you don't need to spend on the Astle & Kern. So you straight away, you're saving that much more money. Instead of spending 6,000 on the 230NC, you're just spending on the earphones themselves. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other permutation combinations that you might consider. You may not want these IEMs in particular and so on, but this was just a very general rundown. So I hope this video has helped you in some way or the other, and I hope I helped you make some sort of buying decision going forward. If you would like to help the channel, I'm sure you know exactly how to. But of course, thank you for tuning into Paul's POV for some sound advice.